Hello everyone, this is Ashish and this is a new series of infrastructure as code with Azure Bicep. This is going to be a series of session that I'm going to do every weekend. So every weekend I'm going to upload one lesson of this topic. Myself Ashish Raj, I'm co-founder of Azure Easy Community, which is a Telegram based community, and I'm a cloud and DevOps architect right now and also a Microsoft certified trainer. So before, without wasting any further time, let's go ahead and start this session. So before we start the session, before we get into the topic, let me, cover what are the different topic or different lessons we are going to cover in this upcoming session for this tutorial. So the first thing we are going to talk about, which is today, is what is infrastructure as code. So this is going to be more of introductory lesson. I would be going through some of the basic concept of infrastructure as code and mostly theoretical aspect of it. And then the next part will be what exactly Azure Bicep is. So how Azure Bicep fit into this particular infrastructure as code discussion, and what exactly it is, how it relates with it, and what are the basic fundamental around it. What exactly it means, why do you need it, why don't you need it, what are the different other alternatives you have that you may want to consider. So all those things we are going to cover in this second lesson, and then the third lesson will be about tools and setup. So from here we will start having more hands-on. So we will start installing the tools or the extensions or the things that you may need on your local machine or the environment that you need to have the testing setup that when you want to learn it. So we will be kind of getting started with the infrastructure as code using Azure Bicep from lesson 3. We will go through some of the most common tools, most common helpful information around the web or from the Microsoft documentation that can give you a bit quick start for this particular tool. Then we will start getting into the basics of bicep file. So what is the structure of file, how different component make up a basic bicep file, how you can kind of develop it, and how you can deploy a basic bicep file onto on Azure, and how you actually the complete basic life cycle around it. We will get into the more advanced topic like data types within bicep file. So when you start working with the programming or a scripting thing, so even though Azure Bicep is not considered to be a programming language and it doesn't claim to be that in future as well, but there are some basic programming construct that are going to be helpful for your bicep development. So when you develop infrastructure as code using bicep, you will need these basic construct which are common across different programming languages including bicep. So bicep is not a programming language, but again, because we are talking about code, you can think of using those different construct that we use in different programming languages. Then the lesson 6 will revolve around parameters, variables, and output. So these are different types of what you call placeholders. So parameter, variables, output may seem like a similar thing, but they have different application. So when do you use which one? How exactly you define them? What are the best practices around them? And how do you use them? So those basic things, and then we will get into the stuff doing hands-on and using those construct into a basic deployment file, and then we'll see that how it works in action. Then the next lesson will talk about parameters. So in the previous lesson, we will talk about the concept and how do you define them. What are their use cases in bicep file, and then we will use parameters to implement the parameters. So in the previous lesson we will understand the concept, and also definitely will do some hands-on, but here the whole aspect will be how do you use a complex scenario, how do you implement it using the best practices and all things around parameters. So and what are the different ways you can use parameters, and where exactly it fits into your scalable infrastructure. Then we talk about loops and conditions. So as I said, even though Bicep is not to be a programming language, but it uses some of the basic construct which revolves around programming languages and scripting languages, and same goes for loops and condition in Biceps. So we'll see that what are the different loops you have and how to use them, where they actually where the application of these loops you have, how do you know what exactly loop is there for infrastructure as code development, and so for conditions. And then we will see how you can use functions. So Azure Bicep, if you are coming from a background of Azure ARM template, of course we will cover some of the basics of ARM template as well. But then again, this course is not going to be in depth of ARM template. But if at all you're coming with that particular background, then you know that ARM template does have functions, and Bicep do expose some of those functions as well, and then some of the additional functions there. So we'll go across different functions type available, what are those different functions types are used for, how you can use them, and some of the examples where they make sense and you can relate them when building infrastructure, and when you are using infrastructure as code using Azure Bicep, you'll see that how they make sense for operators for using functions in Azure Bicep. The next part will be building Azure Bicep modules. So module is another very interesting fact which is coming with Azure Bicep. So you can modularize your code, you can modularize your infrastructure as code, and then reuse the component in your infrastructure, which is a very powerful thing in your infrastructure as code, so that you can reuse some of the components, some of the generalized component across different setup. So we will see how you can build your module and how you can use them in this lesson. And then we will see a concept of target scope. So target scope is one of the very common or very basic thing to say, but it has a very powerful application when you are developing infrastructure as code using Bicep on a scalable or for a very enterprise level scalable infrastructure. So we'll see that how you can use this and how this fits into a scalable infrastructure. The next lesson will be about using Azure Bicep. So in the previous lessons, we will be seeing how do you develop modules, why do you need them, and what are the basic construct when you are building Azure Bicep module. And then in this lesson, we'll be going across how do you actually use those Azure Bicep modules, we'll go through some of the basic steps, the life cycle of modules, and then we'll see the best practices around Azure Bicep modules, and how exactly what are the different patterns you can have when you are building the scalable infrastructure using these construct which are coming from Azure Bicep. The next part will be using private module registry. So in this part, we'll be seeing how you can actually host your modules. So you have modules, now you can host these modules very much similar to container images or something like that, so that it can be shareable. So anyone can access those modules and they can reuse those modules into their infrastructure as code as a component. So it brings that library concept, that perspective where you can actually reuse some of the component being developed by one of the team, and then other teams are consuming it like a consumer, and then maybe bootstrapping it a little bit of modification using some configuration file or parameter files. We'll see that in action in this module, so in this particular lesson. And then the next lesson will be template specs. So it's another way of reusable infrastructure, which is again coming from ARM template as well. So ARM template does have this template specs. So similarly, Bicep lets you use template specs, so you can reuse some of the infrastructure component being defined or being configured by some other team. Maybe it's a central team, maybe it's another team in your organization who is responsible for a certain part of your infrastructure, how it should be configured, what are the best practices, what are the standards around it, so that they just package it like a template spec, and then you can refer the template spec, and then you can use it to construct those infrastructure, as per your requirement. We will see, the details of it. And that's the reason we have a complete dedicated lesson for it. Then we'll, when once we'll have all these basic development concept, and then once we have a full working Bicep template, modules, files, and using it, and then constructing the different infrastructure in the Azure, we will go through the debugging and linting technique. So what are the different tools you have, what are the some of the basic very common technique you can use to debug your Bicep template, or to make use of best practices, or to make sure that your infrastructure as code has some level of quality and some level of standard definitions or standards being implemented there. Uh, then we will talk about how do you do a CI/CD setup for using GitHub Actions for Bicep. So in this particular lesson, we will see that, okay, you have an ARM template, Bicep template, you have developed it, and it is very much reusable using modules, ARM template spec, and all those things. How do you build a CI/CD system, a basic CI/CD setup to deploy these ARM template in a very reusable manner? How do you define different techniques to which is coming from application development world? Essentially the CI, continuous integration and continuous deployment, for your infrastructure deployment as well. And why do you need it? So we will go through all these. We'll start from the very basic concept, like why do you need a CI/CD setup for infrastructure as code, and then we will see it in action, deploying a Bicep template using GitHub Actions and the different things around it. Then we will see how do you use ARM template toolkit. So ARM template toolkit is another can be considered as like an advanced topic for Bicep. So you can actually define test for your Bicep, very much similar to any other programming language. Again, we are mistakenly mentioning programming language to say it's not a programming language. It's a kind of a declarative domain specific script, you can say. But again, because we are talking about infrastructure as code, it does gives you so many different kind of tooling or different kind of features which helps you doing what you do with any programming language development. So here this ARM template toolkit will help you to define some tests, run those tests, so that you can make sure the quality assurance and other things around ARM template or Bicep template development as well. So ARM template toolkit was essentially for ARM template, but again, when we will get into the Bicep, you will see that so many things are coming from ARM template, and Bicep is just making things easy for you. Then the last lesson would be, I would say, I have not actually thought about what exactly I'm going to bring it here in the last session, but I am sure that based on these learnings, based on these different learnings during these different lessons up to 17, we will have certain things which we want to discuss in detail, or maybe like a best practices, or maybe like certain things which I might have skipped or certain things which will come in between by Microsoft, which may look like a good addition for this tutorial. So I'll be just adding it in the next lesson, in the last lesson. So as you can see, it's going to be quite a lengthy series of sessions, and it's going to be very descriptive, one by one lesson for a specific topic. So stay tuned. We will see how we can learn together Azure Bicep in a very easy way, but at the same time going through all those advanced topic like setting up the CI/CD pipeline, or doing the modularization, doing the linting of the bicep template, or using different other techniques like ARM template toolkit for defining the test for your ARM template and all those things. So now, since today it is first session of this series, and we have spent a considerable amount of 15 minutes just talking about what we are going to do in this series. So forgive me for that. It is very important because this is a first series, so we have to set the context what we are going to do. But yes, going forward, this, I think after 2 or 3 sessions, it will start picking up more into the hands-on rather than the PowerPoint. But yes, considering the fact that these are very introductory topic in the initial few sessions, we are going to talk more on the slides first, at least first 2 or 3 sessions. Okay, so let's get started with this first topic, which is infrastructure as code. So what we are going to discuss about is uh, so infrastructure as code coming from the DevOps, overall DevOps practices. And what DevOps is, I'll just go ahead and give you a basic definition of it. So DevOps is the union of people, process, product to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. It's coming from Donovan Brown, who is product manager with Microsoft, and a very known person for his contribution in this community. So what he says that DevOps is consists of people, process, and then the product. So it's union of these people. So people work together, they define certain processes so that they can work together, and then while they are working together, they have to use certain products, certain tools, certain frameworks, so that these all three things can work together to get the continuous delivery of value. So value means that something that makes sense to the end user. So end user do not really worry about what you are developing in Bicep, or what you are developing in PowerShell, or what you are developing in Terraform, or what you are developing in .NET or Java or whatever. Ultimately, it has to bring value to the customer. So when you are developing a application in .NET, and this .NET application in it creates a feature, that feature brings more revenue to the system in a way that it increases the sales. That's the value. That's the value you are generating. So that is the one that is the important metrics for evaluating if we are continuously delivering value to the end user, and during that we combine these three things, then we will be able to do that. So that's what DevOps is. Now, why we are talking about DevOps? Because DevOps has all these different practices. One of them is infrastructure as code, for which we are going to discuss in upcoming weeks, and this is the very much foundation of that topic. So in upcoming session it will be less theoretical or conceptual thing. Of course it will be conceptual, but it will be very much specific to the Bicep, to Azure, to the coding specific things, not like why we exactly these things exist. So this is the first session where we are talking about different DevOps practices where continuous integration, automated testing, continuous deployment, release management, app performance monitoring, load testing and auto scale, availability monitoring, change configuration. So all these things, feature flags. So I have a different session where I'm going through all of these points one by one, and I would recommend you to go into my YouTube channel and see, we have a couple of sessions in past where we are discussing about it. But for the time being, let's expand this infrastructure as code. So infrastructure as code that we are going to talk about, and infrastructure as code is the ability to manage and update identical copies of the same type of infrastructure multiple times in an orderly and predictable fashion. Now we'll break this statement in for a while. I mean, so that we can understand what exactly we are going to do with Azure Bicep, because essentially we are going to implement this same concept using Azure Backup in next upcoming weeks, and actually a lot of weeks. Actually it's like 17-18 sessions, so you can think of like 17-18 weeks we are talking about. So its ability to provision, manage and update identical copies of the same type of infrastructure. Why do we need identical copies of the same type of infrastructure? So think of it. So you have a dev environment. You are deploying resources in dev environment. Uh, if you come from a traditional infrastructure procedure, then you go to portal, you click, you create some virtual machine, you can log into it, you configure that virtual machine, you set up the networking, and then yeah, it's configured as expected and it's a dev environment. Now your developer has deployed its application, maybe using CI/CD of their application uh, life cycle, or maybe they are still in the old age where they are deploying things manually. Everything is working fine in dev environment. Now comes to the production environment deployment, and then they come to you and then they ask you, oh, okay, we need the same environment that you created for us, but this time we need it in production. Now you need to have identical copy of the same infrastructure that we just talked about here. So identical copies of the same infrastructure, and that's when you need it. So you have one type of infrastructure and it never ends in one environment. So when you start for one type of infrastructure, it always starts with dev, then it may go to QA, it may go to staging, and then it will go to production. So you have to have some system where you can create the same type of thing again and again in a very predictable way, in a very orderly and predictable fashion, so that you can be sure that if you click this button, it is going to be the same thing what you have in dev or what you have in QA or so and so forth. And that's where the infrastructure as code comes into picture. So you need to define your infrastructure in code, not in manually, like going into the portal, deploying it, and then logging into doing the SSH or RDP and all those stuff. You have to have this in code, and then if you have it in code, you can just click on it and then it works. So that's why infrastructure as code makes sense. And we just explained. We will talk about benefits in a typical bullet point in a PowerPoint. So benefit of infrastructure as code is declarative syntax. Yeah, it's declarative. So in infrastructure code, actually we have two types of, I think I skipped one that is not really useful nowadays. There is another one which is called imperative syntax. So imperative syntax is like so a typical writing scripting architecture. So you have a PowerShell script. PowerShell, you line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5. So line 1 creates a resource group. Then you create a VM. Then you set up a VNet. Then you create a storage account, and then you do XYZ things. So you go in a very procedural way. 1, 2, 3, 4. So for suppose you could not create a resource group, which is the most primary requirement for any other for other service, then the script will not work for other, and you have to make sure that, if VM is supposed to use this VNet, you have to create this VNet first instead of creating it after VM. So you have to make sure that the procedure and the sequence is correct when you are developing your script, and that's what is called procedural language, which is not good. But what we are going to talk about is we are going to talk about Azure Bicep, which is declarative syntax. So we'll talk about declarative. In declarative syntax, you just define it like, x is equals to y, and it is up to the engine like Azure Bicep to make sure that how to achieve this particular state. So we also call it like desired state concept. So it's the benefit of infrastructure as code tool like Bicep is that they are declarative, and there are many other examples as well. We will get into these examples when we get into the coding in maybe next 2 sessions. Yeah, maybe by from third sessions we will actually look how a declarative syntax looks like and how it is different. But yes, it is declarative. You just have to define how it should be, the order, how it should be made, how it should be achieved. All these things are made sure by the engine which is processing this script. For our case, it is Azure Bicep and Azure Bicep engine, and then the further ARM template, Azure Resource Manager. We'll talk about it. We want to skip those details here because we have dedicated sections. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Let me first remove this. Actually, not next slide, but next point. So if we go to the next point, it is self-documented system and processes. So in case of infrastructure as code using biceps, uh, you have this self-documented system. So they are very easy to remember. So I'll just go ahead and give a quick view of bicep if you have not seen it yet, and you'll see how easy it is to understand. So I'll go to one of the bicep file. This is a very basic bicep file which creates a log analytics workspace, and you can see that what we are going here is we are creating a log analytics workspace, because you can see this what we are going here, and it has this location which is coming from this parameter, but it is very much self-explanatory what is happening here. No logic, it's just declarative. Name this, location this, how to make sure that these things will work together and will be processed accordingly. It's up to the bicep, and we will get into the details of it in a bit. Oh, okay, my screen is yeah. So I think somehow it should be like this. Okay, I think because of screen size, you may not be able to see the proper thing. Let me do this way. Yeah, so it should be visible now properly. Anyway, so it's a quick view. We will see the details of it. How do you do this? This is going to be the main agenda for all the 17-18 sessions actually. So no worries if it is not making sense, but but it's self-documented system and processes. So it explains everything what is happening here. You don't really have to define the things that you are doing in a separate document, or you don't really have to create a huge file to explain how you are building the infrastructure. So if you are coming from a previous era where infrastructure was not built using infrastructure as code, you're supposed to create a lot of document, screenshot how you are building this infrastructure, what are the different steps you have to do, what are the different prerequisites are there, and all those XYZ things. So no need, you just create your infrastructure as code. That's the document you have. Version control. So you can do version controls because it's a code. You can do version control. You can keep it in a version control system, and then you can benefit the the benefits of version control, I would say. So what are the benefits of version control? Again, it's coming from a DevOps world. You can have access to many people, so it's a shared thing. Anyone can have a look on it. Anyone can, of course, provided they have access to the repository, to the version control that you are using, for example Git and all. We will see what are the different options you have in terms of version control, but you have the benefit of sharing your infrastructure as code with different people across team, and then ask them to contribute it. So it's not staying in someone's OneDrive or someone's folder. It's shared with proper RBAC role-based access control roles permissions, so that someone can contribute to it, some just like any other, just like developers do. So they can share their code, people can contribute to it, or different people can work on the same code base using different branching strategy and all those stuff. So yeah, it's more of a version control. Again, I have sessions where I have explained Git in detail. You can see what are version control and why do we use. Mostly we are using Git these days. So yeah, you need to know what Git is and what are the different benefits developers have, and the same thing goes with infrastructure people nowadays. Immutable infrastructure. So immutable, you can achieve immutable infrastructure. Immutable infrastructure. Yeah. So what exactly immutable infrastructure is? So immutable infrastructure comes from the same thought process where you have to have different copies of identical infrastructure. So you have a infrastructure. You have defined everything in infrastructure as code. The moment something changes, you don't go into the infrastructure and change those things. So it is immutable. You don't mutate the infrastructure. What you do is you go back to the code, you change that thing in code, and then you deploy it again, so that the infrastructure is changing from the code, not in the infrastructure. So if something goes wrong, if something is changing in the infrastructure, so for example, you created an infrastructure of web application, you installed framework Node, Java, .NET, you did all the things, and then all of a sudden OS update has done some mischievous things, and then your framework, Node, Java, or any other framework that you're using, maybe Python. Yeah, it doesn't update that frequently, but yeah, I mean, anything get disturbed by the latest OS update and it's not working. So how do? You go to the infrastructure, change some configuration, change by the patch? No. You investigate what was the issue, you change your code base, deploy the infrastructure again, destroy the previous one, and done. So it is easy to achieve immutable infrastructure. It is coming from the thought process where you have this Docker images. Yeah. So you have a Docker image, you share your Docker image, people use this Docker image to create their Docker instances, and if something goes wrong, you change the code which is responsible for creating this Docker image. you publish a new Docker image version, and you ask people to use the latest version. You don't go into the Docker image instance and change or debug and fix it. So you don't have to fix the infrastructure now. The same concept you can apply to infrastructure provisioning on your public cloud like Azure, or yeah, because we are talking about Azure Bicep, it is Azure. But if you are using some other infrastructure as code tool like Terraform, yeah, you can do the same thing for other cloud providers. But yeah, we will not get into those details. I mean, but yes, the idea here is that you can achieve infrastructure, immutable infrastructure, if you are practicing infrastructure as code. Otherwise, you will always get into the the greed, where you will get into the logging into the system, and you try to change the system, and you try to debug the system, and you try to fix that existing system, because it is very difficult to replicate that, because you don't have the code. It was done manually. So that's why no manual infrastructure. If you are doing infrastructure as code, you are safe for those things. Don't repair, redeploy. So that's the exactly the whole purpose of having immutable infrastructure. So you don't repair. Something goes wrong, something goes south, okay, go ahead, delete it, redeploy it, or maybe go ahead, deploy it, new instance, maybe dev, test it, make sure everything works as expected, swap it, destroy the old one, deploy the new one, and then you are good. So that's the way of having a good infrastructure practice, where you can deploy as frequently as it may be. So you don't have to stop. You do not need to know what your infra. So you don't. Yeah, there is a common thing, a common phrase in DevOps. Well, don't treat your infrastructure like a pet. It's a cattle. It's replaceable. You don't have to. So pet are traditionally, you don't want to replace it. You have a very affection towards it. You have I would not say customized, but yeah, you have a very special bonding with it. So you don't treat your infrastructure like that. You don't treat your infrastructure like a special thing. It's just a server. If you define using a infrastructure as code like Bicep, Terraform, or whatever, then you are sure that if something goes wrong, I will delete this. Just click on the button, and then this script will or code will create the infrastructure in the same way. So don't repair, redeploy. Small changes rather than batches. So if you have infrastructure as code, as and when some changes are requested, you can quickly go ahead and make those changes, and you can deploy it, rather than you wait for a huge number of things, and then you make changes those things, and then you test, then you do a full manual things of testing, validating. If you are sure that this infrastructure can be deployed using code, okay, all of a sudden someone comes and says that, oh, okay, we need a small change in, okay, let me show you something. So some requirement comes, and they say, okay, we need this in a different SKU. We don't need this in this SKU. You just change this line, deploy it. Yeah, good. You don't have to wait and create the workspace and then change it, or wait for someone to approve it or whatever. So it is using CI/CD. CI/CD will take care of it. Anyway, so it's small changes, not batches. You can very much work in an agile team. Yeah, next time the next title says that agile and highly available services. So you can be sure that your infrastructure is highly available. Something goes wrong, redeploy. Something changed, redeploy. Small changes required, go ahead, change it, redeploy. So you can easily do those things in a very speedy manner, and you can be as agile as it should be or as it can be. So you can very well work in an agile team where developers are changing their code on a frequently manner. You are changing your infrastructure in the same frequency if required. If not, then not. Okay, so yeah, this is the last slide, I would say. Uh, and yeah, we are already 10 minutes up, so we will quickly finish it. But this one is about what are the different things you will do if you are working in infrastructure as tools ecosystem. So this ecosystem is not really complete. It's it will just give you a kind of a flavor or kind of a idea that what we are talking about, what are the different tools we will interact if we are implementing infrastructure as code. So the first thing is that yeah, you are an infrastructure developer, so you should know some, you are the one who is starting this journey, actually, I would say. Then you will come across one of the tool, Visual Studio Code. It can be a simple Notepad++ as well. So Azure Bicep does not really require a spatial editor like Visual Studio or NetBeans or something like that. You can do this in any editor, but if you have Visual Studio Code, you are going to love it, actually. So it gives a lot of extensions that are very helpful in learning not only Bicep but for other languages or for other frameworks as well. It's very useful. They have tons of extensions that are very helpful. But yes, we will look into the different extensions which are very useful, at least for Bicep development. But you can do it with Notepad if you are really crazy enough, and you can remember those syntax, and you can easily follow the documentation and everything. Then yeah, it is possible. Azure Resource Explorer is another tool where you can go and explore the APIs exposed by Azure. We'll look into Azure Resource Manager and then it will start making sense. But it is essentially like, you can open it, you can explore the different services in Azure, and then you can see what are the different APIs are available, which you can actually use in different ways. PowerShell, yeah, I mean PowerShell is another PowerShell editor. Yeah, if you are writing some PowerShell script, you can do that. So we will be writing a couple of PowerShell script as well if needed. So it's and this list is not really limited. I mean, you can have any other tool as well, but these are the most common one when we are talking about Azure or Azure Bicep. Ah, oops. Oh, then language tool framework. So you have to pick one of the language that you want to work with. So the first one is Azure Bicep. It's icon of Azure Bicep. We are going to do a lot of Azure Bicep. That's why it is. Then we have this JSON, which is called ARM template. It is another way of, actually ARM template and Bicep are interrelated, and we are going to discuss about it, how they are related to each other. You can generate a ARM template using Bicep file, or you can generate a Bicep file using ARM template. So they are actually uh, representing the same thing in different phases, I would say. But yeah, we will talk about how they relate with each other. But yes, you can pick one of them. So you have ARM template, which is previous way of doing infrastructure as code in Azure, and still it is. You can do this, or you can pick this Azure Bicep, the new way of doing things in Azure. But if you are into hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, Terraform is your tool. So you can use Terraform to define your define your Azure resources using infrastructure as code concept, and you can very well deploy it. And yeah, this is also a very popular tool. We will I'll take 1 minute to save when do you want which one. So ARM template and Bicep are essentially the same thing. It's both are coming from Microsoft and they are similar, and they are, yeah, I mean, one they are I would say one they are face of one another actually. So one thing can develop another thing. So Bicep can generate ARM template, or ARM template can generate Bicep file. So they do not compete with each other. It's essentially you who is going to decide. Yes, Bicep is comparatively easy for learning, and that's why they have made it. That's why that was the whole objective when they started building up a new syntax or new programming language or new scripting language or framework, whatever you want to call it. The whole objective was to make it simple. ARM template has been a little bit of difficult for people to follow, but at the same time they both are from Microsoft. Terraform is from HashiCorp, as you know. It's multi-cloud. So if you do this for Azure, you can do this for AWS, and they have a concept of provider very much similar to library, you can say. So you can define similar syntax, but yeah, different features, different kind of services for different cloud. If you are into Azure and you don't think you have, and you have a separate team for different cloud maybe, and you are very much independent in choosing your tool set, then Bicep is very good for you if you are Azure centric company. But if you are into multi-cloud and you are okay with certain services, if you are not getting support for Terraform, and this will happen for most of the very new services, because as you know, Bicep has day one support for any service in Azure. So as soon as a service is live in Azure, it can be done with Bicep or ARM template. But that cannot be said with the Terraform, because it's third party tool. Terraform will take some, HashiCorp will take some time to develop the module around it, a provider around it, or test it, and then they will release it for you. So it may takes a little time to get support from Terraform for some of the very latest and greatest of the tooling. If that does not make sense to you, then Terraform is a tool for you. But if yes, you are very concerned about having the most of the recent things with infrastructure as code, yeah, you have to think about Bicep around template. And the same goes for other tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet. These are different vendors, but they apply the same concept, and you can use them. Yeah, it's, yeah, because it's the first session, it may take a little bit time. Yeah, version control, so you can place it in the version control. There are different vendors. Azure repo is coming from Azure DevOps, Bitbucket is coming from Atlassian. GitHub is another tool where you can host your code in Git version control system. Git we are talking because Git is one of the most famous version control these days, and I have not seen any other version control competing with it, at least to have it. So if you have a very specific requirement, there are different other version control, but we are not going to cover and we are not going to talk about it. So version control, you can version it and you have to know it. So Azure Repo, Bitbucket, GitHub, any one of them. We will talk about GitHub. We will be using GitHub actually. So we will see how to use it, what are the different benefits you have. CI/CD pipeline. So when you have an infrastructure as code, you can define it in version control, and then you can trigger a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline using Azure Pipelines. GitHub Actions. So GitHub Action is kind of a pipeline tool from GitHub. So you can define workflows, you can task one by one, and then you can you can kind of trigger it. Very much similar to any other pipeline tool. Azure Pipelines, it's another service from Azure DevOps services where you can have your pipeline, and then Jenkins, one of the popular one. So for us, we will be talking about GitHub Actions. Azure Pipelines I have done in past, so you can have a look on some of the old videos. But yes, I mean, we will be doing with GitHub Actions as far as CI/CD is concerned. And then once you have the pipelines, you will deploy it somewhere. So you can, so if you are using any one of the tool, that will dictate where you are going to do. So if you are using Azure Bicep or ARM template, definitely it is Azure or Azure Stack. Azure Stack is private cloud from Microsoft. They both will be able to get the deployment from this language tool. But if you are doing it on Amazon, maybe Terraform, Ansible, Chef, or maybe Amazon Cloud Formation Template, which is their legacy traditional infrastructure as code tool. But you can follow the same uh, ecosystem, similar ecosystem to deploy to any other cloud. Amazon, Azure, private cloud, Azure Stack, Cloud, Google Cloud, GCP. So if you are using Terraform, essentially you will be able to deploy anywhere of this is on-prem. So even on-prem does have support for infrastructure code. But for us, VS Code, Azure Bicep, GitHub, GitHub Actions, and then Azure. This is how we are going to move around. Yeah, I could have arranged it in a little bit better way. But yeah, anyway, we will be talking about these different ecosystem from specific pillars. But yes, you can interchangeably change them. So if you have, instead of GitHub, you can use Azure Repo or Bitbucket or any other provider to have your version control. Similarly, if you are more into Terraform, you can have Terraform to define your infrastructure and follow the rest of the step depending upon that particular tool. So these are the things we are going to explore in different sessions, and we'll get into in-depth, very much specific to Azure Bicep and Azure ecosystem. That's it. So if you are connected with me on LinkedIn, please go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Telegram group, which is DevOps group, where we discuss various things. We discuss about various topic related to DevOps and all. Yeah, we are almost 1 hour. This is first session. We will be coming up with the next session a little bit shorter. I'll make it like 30 to 45 minutes maximum. But yes, because it's initially it is very much conceptual, so it may go like that. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let's connect again next weekend to have the next lesson, which will be what is Bicep. So yeah, let's connect next weekend and we will talk about Azure Bicep, and then we'll do some hands-on, start doing hands-on actually. Thank you so much. Have a good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you.